Sitaram. Good morning to all our listeners here in Trinidad and Tobago, of the Caribbean, and worldwide, and all of you who are listening to us on the various different platforms. Let me welcome you to this regular programming on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. And I want to remind all our brothers and sisters out there listening that this is an interactive program. The numbers are on your screen. 663-2335, 663-1027. And you can call at any time during the program. The operators will notify me and I'll take your call. You can ask questions, you can make short comments on the subject that we are speaking about, drug addiction, alcoholism. And I want to also remind you that this program will be repeated again on radio and TV Jagriti at 10 p.m. tonight. So those of you who are busy at this time of day, you can also tune in back and listen to it. And it will be posted shortly afterwards on YouTube and Facebook under the heading Addiction and Recovery. And you can also look at it there, or you can refer it as a resource material to anyone who you think may be able to benefit from the content of this program. I know that this is a very highly stigmatized subject, alcoholism and drug addiction. No one likes to admit they have a problem with alcohol or drugs. And as a result, a lot of people feel very intimidated to call this station. But I want to encourage those of you who can to call. Because when you ask a question, not only you benefit, but all the other people who are listening, they also benefit from the conversations that we have. And the process of alcoholism and drug addiction is not a respecter of anyone based on their ethnicity or status or anything. The process is the same. It doesn't matter whether you drank rum in Caroni or in Davie, or you drank scotch in West Moorings or wherever. The process is the same. The effect will be the same. And today I want to speak about a very sensitive issue. I know this could be a little bit painful for people, some people who have had this experience, but I want today to speak about the relationship between suicide and substance abuse. In preparation for this lecture, this talk this morning, I glimpsed at a research that was published by our own Professor Jared Hutchinson, who I had the privilege to work with at Cowra Hospital in St. Anne's for many years. And it is a lot of very interesting material came up in that research, as indeed, there's a shortage of research material on this subject matter in the Caribbean generally. Most of our research findings we get comes out of North America or Europe. And indeed, I myself have been involved in research here in Trinidad, and I will share some of that information in a little while. And, there has been a problem even worldwide, especially where alcoholism is concerned, where still in some parts of the world, alcoholism is not recognized as a disease. It is still seen as a moral issue. It's a behavioral problem, and that is why it is so highly stigmatized. Even in Trinidad, notwithstanding all the work that people like Professor Berbrand did, Professor Hutchinson, and so many people in Alcoholics Anonymous have been doing to educate our population. Indeed, this program has been running on various media houses. I have been doing this program since 1993. In spite of all of this, you still have a lot of people who still see alcoholism as a bad habit, as though these people are weak-willed. A lot of people can't understand, and they will say, nobody hold you down and put the alcohol in your mouth and make you drink it. You went and drank it for yourself. And how come a sensible person like you, in fact, even little children, know they shouldn't be using alcohol, cigarettes, and marijuana and all of those things? How come you are not aware of this? How come you can't see what you're doing to yourself and others, while it is so obvious to everyone who has come to know you? And that is the baffling part of this illness. And today I want to deal with some of that as well. And I invite your questions, of course. You know, according to the research so far, it seems that there are so, alcohol and drug addiction. In fact, way back in the 1960s, I remember Professor Berbrand doing a research at the hospital in Port of Spain, and he found that almost 65% of the bed space in the hospital was occupied by patients who, in some way, were there because of an alcohol related problem. Now, I myself, when I studied in Jamaica in the 1980s, because I'm a person in recovery, I had a passion, and I still do have that passion to work with people who have alcohol and drug abuse problems, because this is a matter that is very close to my heart, having suffered alcoholism myself. So in Jamaica, my research, my thesis was based on alcoholism in Jamaica. And I suddenly realized that you could not get information. I went to the hospital at the University of the West Indies, UC Hospital, it is called, in Papine. And what suddenly dawned on me that a lot of people were coming in for alcohol related problems, but were never being diagnosed as alcoholic. They would fall down and break their arm, and of course, they would be diagnosed with a broken arm, or they would have gotten into a vehicular accident as a result of alcoholism, but they would be diagnosed as suffering multiple injuries as a result of motor vehicular accident. So that when you looked at the statistics, you would think, well, you don't really have much of an alcohol problem in Trinidad or in these countries in the Caribbean, because we were not diagnosing the root causes of a lot of these illnesses. Very rare, we would see a very small percentage of that population coming when, like we say in Trinidad, water more than flour. They get into trouble really, and they show up at the substance abuse prevention and treatment center. Then we become aware, well, okay, these are people who have alcohol and drug problems. So that it is conservatively estimated that in every population, at least 10% of the population is directly impacted by alcohol and drug abuse. And it was based on these statistics that a lot of countries decided, and companies, business, decided to set up what you call employee assistance programs, because they realized that they were losing a lot of manpower as a result of alcoholism and drug addiction. So if I would just go to some of the statistics that I came up with this morning. In Canada, they found that 6% of all death was due to alcohol. In Germany, there was an even higher percentage, because again, it is how you determine the root cause of the problem. In Germany, they saw 30% of deaths were being caused in some way related to alcohol, especially when you're looking at people between the ages of 25 to 44, because that is the high point of alcoholism. Now, as I say that, let me mention there are mean ages for addiction. That is, when you take all the population of addicts, you divide it by the number and you come up with the average, it is established by research that about the mean age that most people get addicted to marijuana and cocaine would be around 16 to 17 years in Trinidad and Tobago. But the mean age for alcoholism, that is when people are confirmed alcoholics, now have become dependent on alcohol, is 35. So that it takes a while for people to eventually, after habitual drinking, to eventually cross that imaginary borderline from social drinking to compulsive or alcoholic type drinking. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, it was Professor Hutchinson was saying that there was a 57% chance. Now, we were looking at alcoholism among various ethnic groups. And I think even from empirical evidence and from a research that I myself did way back in 1979, I did a research at the Alcohol Treatment Center, which we used to be housed at St. Anne's Hospital at the time. And what myself and there were a few other members of the group, we did it as a group assignment for what was then the summer course in social work studies in Trinidad. And what we found was that 82% of the readmissions to Alcoholic Treatment Center for alcoholism came from County Victoria and County Caroni. And they were predominantly East Indians. So I will speak about that on another program, but that led me to do further studies. I wanted to find out why Indian people were drinking so much alcohol. In fact, that was like a personal indictment on myself because yes, I too drank, and I came originally from South Trinidad, and I am now in County Caroni. So it seemed like they were speaking of me. However, I think those statistics still hold very firmly today. And we have heard so many songs among the East Indian population about rum till I die and all the various genres. Um, so that the point I want to make here is that, you know, I have I have interviewed a lot of people here in my practice and at Cora on alcoholism and drug addiction. And, very often you will hear people who are chronic alcoholics speak about, you know, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Meaning, and I've seen so many people in my practice here and in my various postings. I worked at Cora Hospital, I worked at Ward 1 Hospital in San Fernando, I worked at St. Anne's, Ward 8 in the Port of Spain General Hospital, Cuba. I've had ample opportunity working out there in the field and also being director of the Piparo Empowerment Center, working with alcoholics and homeless people at the Center for Socially Displaced Persons, that is Riverside Car Park. I had ample opportunity to really look at this problem and to see, there's a lot of people who they reach to that point where they are sick and tired of living. They have been suffering with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, you name it. And the paper that was written by and presented by Professor Hutchinson had to do with mortality as relates to alcoholism and drug addiction. And there is a very close correlation between substance abuse and mental illness. And this is why the mental health facilities need to, in fact, at first, the alcohol treatment center was housed at St. Anne's Hospital because it was seen as it was also at one time diagnosed as mental illness. But because of the stigmas associated with St. Anne's Hospital, for good reason, and I agree, the substance abuse unit was removed from the St. Anne's Hospital because a lot of people did not want to have that label. In Trinidad, if in any of the communities you said that Joe or John went to St. Anne's, the immediate impression that the population in the village has, well, boy, he gone mad, and there would be this label attached to that person. So that a lot of people, they would genuinely resist any labeling or going to any mental health professional seeking help. So that, as I say that, let me just give a scenario. I have seen a lot of people, especially middle and upper class families, their children have access to finances, They have access to more social occasions. Most of these households have their own private bars. And so children go to the parties and the get-togethers and so on. And even at graduations, I've heard not too long ago where there's a bar. I got reports from a graduation that was recently held at the Hilton, where at the graduation for people who are now over 16, and there's a bar as well, and young men are helping themselves generously to drinks and all of that. And so a lot of people will start drinking out of curiosity, recreational drinking, and I mean, no one sees any problems with that. But these young people, both boys and girls, who would have experimented with it, who would have, been introduced to it at occasions like this, or for Christmas by a relative, or going to a in-house party and so on, would have been introduced, because in our culture here, drinking, almost all our social occasions are punctuated with drink. And as if to add to that, most of the television programs, the radio and media houses, except this one, they advertise generously the question of drinking alcohol and so on. And it's a revenue earner for a lot of these media houses. So that bombarded by all of this and growing up in a culture where we don't have to look for a reason to drink, a lot of these people start drinking out of curiosity. But then would find that, look, when we face with the stress of exam, the competitiveness that CSEC and CXC and all of this have brought onto our population, it is generating so much stress for our young people that they remember that, look, when I took the drink, I felt relieved. It changed my mood. I did not have a care in the world. And so gradually they start using it, not now out of curiosity or recreationally, but they started using alcohol to cope, or marijuana, or one of those that they are, depending on which part of Trinidad, what is available, what's on the block, what is in the peer group, they start using it, whether it be cigarettes, marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, or even some prescription pills. And so these young people start presenting with problems now, because once you start using these drugs, once they are wearing away, you are going to suffer with withdrawal symptoms. So a lot of these people end up going to see the psychiatrist or the doctor, right? Because they have problems now to sleep. They've been becoming depressed. They're becoming very irritable and anxious. They start presenting with behavioral problems that parents can't control. And so they end up by the psychiatrist. And let me just speak here. You know, we have all of these professionals who are serving a definite purpose in the society, you know, and it is very important to have doctors and psychiatrists and so on. But a lot of people don't seem to be able to discriminate. Now, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who specializes in psychiatry, right? But one of their major tools that they use in their intervention would be what is called chemotherapy. They give medication, and for good purpose, of course. Most of the psychiatrists I've worked with are very responsible people. However, I would like to say that psychotropic drugs, that is mood altering substances, should really only ethically, it should only be prescribed by psychiatrists because they understand these things. They have done a lot of studies, they understand, how to manage that intervention. Because no one should really have to be on medication for the rest of their life. I'm not blaming the doctors and the psychiatrists for doing this, but we Trinidadians, we are so smart, sometimes too smart for our own good, that, if we go to the psychiatrist, we go to the doctor, they prescribe a medication, we read it, and we decide we don't want to have to go back and pay any fee to see this doctor again. And we go to some, you know, exploitative pharmacy. Some of these people do this, and we buy the drugs you know, of off the counter or under the counter, and we start using them. And common sense will tell you, once you start using a drug, if you continue to use it, you start developing what is called tolerance. So that the same 5 milligram or the one pill is not going to produce the result that you would want. And then you have to use more and you have to use more often. And there is the beginning of the dependence. And the more you use, yes, you get the benefit, but when it is wearing away, the withdrawal symptoms become much more severe. So what I have been seeing here is a lot of upper and middle class families bringing their young people who is at university now, or and dropping out of class, can't study, presenting with behavioral problems, acting very inappropriately, being disappearing from home for days, and you name it, a whole lot of problems, attempted suicide, suicidal ideation, because what has happened initially, these young children would have gone to the psychiatrist and prescribed some psychiatric drug, antidepressant or sedative or all of that they've been using, but having been introduced to alcohol and other drugs, they start using it in conjunction because they don't want to have to go back to the psychiatrist, or they find that the psychiatric drug, in fact, in a very short time, you develop tolerance. And so now, when you use the alcohol with that, it boosts the effect of it. And a lot of that can lead to suicide. Sometimes deliberate, sometimes accidental. We call it overdose. Because when they develop the psychiatric drug, whether it be the anti-anxiolytics or the sedative or any one of those, they never administered it to cohorts in conjunction with alcohol or marijuana or any one of the other things. So that no one knows when you take a sleeping pill and then you take a good few drinks after that, you can literally put your heart to sleep instead of putting your brain alone. And if your heart drop asleep, you're dead. And yes, you will be labeled as, well, depending on your life circumstances, you could be labeled as having committed suicide. Now, drugs in itself can lead a person to suicidal ideation. Because when I said, you become sick and tired of being sick and tired, it reached to a point. Now we know from empirical evidence that a lot of people who use drugs, especially if you start using it regularly, it is going to affect your health. It will affect your ability to work. It will affect your relationship. There's numerous cases of domestic violence. It makes the person very irritable. In fact, there are a lot of people when they drink and they're under the influence, they're much more manageable, they're mellow and they will sing and be nice and affable. But when they're sober, they become very irritable because they're in withdrawal, and they can become very difficult to live with. And they find it difficult to live within themselves because under the influence of drugs, sometimes they do things, next day they are ashamed. They're scared, they're afraid, they become depressed. And that is so cyclical that at some point they become fed up of that life, because by then a lot of them would have lost their job or hanging on by a string, or lost their status in the society, and with chronic use would have ended up homeless. And this is, having actually worked with these populations, because when the Piparo Empowerment Center started, when we started there in the year 2000, I was the first director there. We were only taking homeless people. And among that population, I'll tell you, when you interview some of these people, it was so emotional. There were some of these homeless people who were living on the streets now were professionals, you know, journalists, accountants, you name it. They had reached to that point. But alcohol and drugs can bring a person down from wherever you are. It is not a respecter of anyone. So that You know, I have known, and this is a very sensitive subject because I know people who committed suicide because of alcoholism and drug addiction, And before I know time runs out very quickly, so that I want to say if you have someone who is drinking habitually, who is even, if you have a history of alcoholism in your family, then you need to look out for these things. And, even though a person may, may not, you know, be under the influence, they could be presenting with symptoms that will tell you, look, it is called suicidal ideation. In fact, in my drinking days, I too thought about committing suicide, if I may say so, myself. Because drinking and drug use is in a way, a slow form of suicide. And I have heard a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts saying, boy, I just wish I go to sleep and never got up. Because you couldn't wake up to the reality that you had created for yourself, the relationship that were damaged, the the conflict that you would be part of, the words that you would have said to others, the insulting things that happened. You understand? So that one of the signs of people who may tend to commit suicide are people who threaten. They openly threaten, look, I feel like killing myself, or I will kill myself, or if you do this, I will, or if this happen, I will. It means that they're already thinking of it. You understand? So that then today, especially in the time that we live in now, a lot of people are posting things. We have seen so many people who, I remember a few incidents in North America where people posted that look, they were going to kill these children in the school and then they were going to kill themselves. So you need to look at these what people are posting online. And sometimes the family may not be able to see it, but the friends can. They can see what kind of things people are posting online. They are isolating themselves. They are, you know, blaming others. They are expressing in their posts exasperation with life, that they are fed up and all of that. Then a pretty sure sign is people who start giving away their valuables, things because they are thinking of it. They're seriously contemplating. If a person is depressed, anxious, start giving away their valuables, is on these psychiatric medication, especially because when you're on psychiatric medication, when it is wearing away, you can become very depressed and suicidal. So this is something that you need to pay attention to. Start giving away. Then they may contact people to say goodbye, and you're wondering why. You know, you haven't heard from this person a long time. All of a sudden, they call you, and you can't figure out what was the reason. And you realize that they're sounding like they're depressed. These are all red flags that one should pay attention to. Then, for people who live with someone, you may experience sudden mood changes and inappropriate behavior. Now, drugs could cause that, but even without drugs, there's always some people always very angry, always seem to be very angry because they're not happy with their life. And as I say that, at the beginning of the program, let me thank Francis and all those people at this radio station, television station, who source these very, very valuable headers, that lead up to the program. This morning, you had 6 points on happiness, which, if you just look at the antonyms to these, people who are not doing these things, they're isolating, they're not optimistic, they're not very grateful for living, all of these things. These are also signs that a person is, you know, there's a possibility there. of a person having suicidal ideation. Then, as I mentioned before, uncontrolled anger and isolation. These are people who, you know, they start becoming more and more insular. They don't want to, they find no joy in going to family get-togethers. They find no joy in going to social occasions. They prefer to stay by themselves. You understand? And I'm sure you all know people like that. And then, of course, there's the physical, psychological symptoms that you may find present, like people who can't sleep all night, they up and down walking when they should be sleeping, you know. Insomnia could, these are all predisposing factors to eventual suicide. Now, I'm saying this guardedly. Not everybody who have sleep problems or everybody who have anger is going to commit suicide. But you look at all of these together, and especially when it is coupled with substance abuse, one has to be especially vigilant. Now, there's a pretty clear sign, and I have had to counsel quite a number of young people, who self-mutilate. They're cutting themselves. And, sometimes even the family are unaware of that, because they close the door, they're in a room and they're doing this, you know, taking out their anger on themselves or thinking about committing suicide, but not courageous enough to do it. And they're cutting themselves, and you see they're wearing long sleeve all the time, even though the weather is very hot, they're still in their long sleeves. You need to look at that. You also look at people who have been injecting drugs, and they also wear in long sleeve in the height of summer and so on. And you would, if you have a close relative living with you and doing things like that, you may want to take a peek and see what is evident on their arms and so on. So you can't ignore these signs. These are all red flags that could tell you need to pay attention. Now, although we tend to look at, as I mentioned earlier on, we don't really diagnose alcoholism and drug addiction directly. We usually, the after effects of it, the injuries and the consequences are usually noted, but very rare we go to the root cause being alcoholism and drug addiction. So that, like I mentioned earlier on, when Professor Berban did his research, he found that almost 65% of the bed space were occupied by people who were in some way are using alcohol or drug. Because when a person uses alcohol and drugs, what happens? They don't eat properly. They don't exercise. They don't take care of themselves. So they are more prone to disease and illnesses. Also, that the lifestyle, the alcoholic lifestyle, undermines their general health and well-being. On the psychological side, they do not attend to the relationships. They create a lot of problems in their relationship, in their workplace, and they lack the proper coping strategies. They tend to become depressed or anxious and all of that. And this too can lead eventually to mental illness. So that when I worked at St. Anne's Hospital, I saw a lot of young people coming in there with what we call drug-induced psychosis. And most of the time, this was not, well, we know mental illness could be genetic, but a lot of times it was because of marijuana use or the using the more potent substances like cocaine and joy juice and all of those things, the datura and all of that. We would see them coming in there, the hallucinogens and so on. And sometimes they would be using prescription pills in excess, and they will end up back in the hospital again. So that it usually causes a lot of health problems, but it also causes, drug use causes people to engage in risky behavior. So we see a lot of people coming into substance abuse when they eventually show up at Cora or wherever, or Piparo, they will be suffering with sexually transmitted diseases like HIV, AIDS, gonorrhea, and all of those things. They expose themselves to a lot of risk, not only health risk, but they expose themselves to violence as well. Because when you take the drug and you don't pay the pusher, or you find yourself in places stealing people's property to be able to source your drugs, you can end up being beaten up. You can get up. There's always, eventually, in every rum shop, they'll, on almost a daily basis, you'll have people threatening to fight or fighting and ending up in the police station, ending up in the courthouse. I work in the courthouse, I can tell you that too. And so that you expose yourself to risk. But then again, the guy who drinks at the party and sits behind the steering wheel now with these fast cars, we know the result of that. Eventually, so many people die. And they kill other people as well because of their substance abuse. So that there is a definite relationship between substance abuse and mortality rates. Although we don't, as I said earlier on, when you find yourself in an emergency uh, room in a hospital, you very rare you ever get diagnosed for being alcoholic. You would have come in there for multiple injuries as a result of a fight or an accident or something like that. Or you would have ended up on the wards because of cirrhosis of your liver or some other health respiratory illness because of smoking cigarettes or drinking rum, or you get and there's a relationship between cardiac problems and cigarette smoking and drug abuse as well. So that this is not something to take lightly. And for those people who are listening to the program, if you have questions, as I said, you could text the number 768-5925 with your questions or your comments. I'd be happy to have them. And if I, I can always respond to these questions that you might have raised during the week with me on the program when we come on Thursday, and you can look out for the answers. So that, you know, I must mention this. I have had the argument, a lot of people say, but if you take a few drinks, it is said that it is good for your health. Yes, there are researches that show a drink of wine every day can have very good positive effects on the circulation of your blood and all of that. And that is true. But how many people can stop at taking a tablespoon of alcohol? How many people will take it as a medication? I know very few people who will stop at taking just one drink. Now, yes, let me correct myself. There are people who could actually take one drink of wine, a glass of wine, and stop. And they are not alcoholics, right? And that is, if you can do that and stop, is good. But let me say this, not everybody who drink will become alcoholics, but everybody who became alcoholics started with that first drink. So that there are some who would take the one drink and have the meal and enjoy it. But then there would be those as I described earlier on, the young people at the graduation who would take one drink on that occasion, or a few got high and, had a good time and remember it. Boy, you remember that graduation? And I pushed down that fella in the swimming pool and all of that. And it creates really nice memories. But there will be some of them who would not only graduate to sixth form and to university, they will also graduate to alcoholism. That could become a serious problem and really derail your whole career. In fact, I was doing well until I was 18, until alcohol got into the equation. And my whole life, it was like it stood still. Not only stood still, it went backward. There's a saying, you could run, you could walk, you could creep, you could even crawl to freedom, but you cannot stagger to freedom. And once you're drinking, your life, you seem to be going 2 foot forward, 3 foot sideways, 4 foot backward, and you fall down. And so I found my life was not going anywhere at all for the next 18 years. I was marking time in one spot. In fact, it was a retrograde step where the little respect people had for me was wearing away. I was losing confidence in myself. And, I'm lucky that I was able to manage to hold on to a job. And it was only when I stopped drinking at age 36 that I was able to resume my life and go back to school. And, if God's self had come in those days and said someday you would be hosting a television program, I would have probably asked him if he drunk, you know. But I can tell anyone listening out there that it can be done. It doesn't matter how bad you have reached in your drinking or drug use, even if you have been thinking about suicide, or you have someone who has expressed or you think might be at risk, help is available. There are several hotlines. In fact, I can be reached at 671-3040. That is 671-3040. And there are many other practitioners who, as I mentioned earlier on, you have psychiatrists, but you also have people who are psychotherapists who use counseling to do an intervention. And there are social workers like myself who also do counseling. And there's very little risk that you can become addicted to counseling. Social workers, trained social professionals are taught how not to create the dependence or transference, as we call it. And so help is available. And we are fortunate in Trinidad and Tobago that we have the highest concentration of AA groups per capita than any other country in the world. So if you have anyone out there who has a drinking or drug problem, or who might have been expressing, especially if they have been expressing any of the symptoms I mentioned, isolation, giving away their things, wanting to say goodbye, or actually threatened to kill themselves, then you need to attend to that urgently. Get help for them so that this can be averted. You know, in fact, there are people who become mentally ill and eventually commit suicide because of overdosing. And that too, these are all preventable illnesses. They're not caused by virus or bacteria. And there's no injection of medicine known to man up to this point in time that can really cure addiction. The only treatment is really counseling, psychotherapy, and support. Support from family members who understand the nature of the illness, and support from Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and other support groups. Your temple and your guru and your mentor and all of these can come in very valuable resources. I know this is not an exhaustive discussion on this subject, and I especially targeted it because I know that there's a high incidence of suicide among young East Indian boys in particular. And this is a subject that we probably have to explore again in the future. Why? Why so many young Indian men, in particular, Indian boys, are committing suicide? I also note, and speaking to uh, a good friend in Guyana, that they have been having similar problems with their populations there. So again, I want to thank all of you who are listening to this program and who join us every Thursday. And to let you know that this program will be posted on YouTube as in a matter of minutes after the conclusion. And it will be also posted on Facebook, and it will be repeated on this television station at 10 p.m. tonight. So those of you who want to go back, look at it, or refer someone to it, feel free to do that. And I want to thank the radio station, television station, for giving us this airtime as a community service. They have been doing this, and also to express my respect and admiration for this media house for not for depriving themselves, I would say, of the revenue that they could have earned from advertising alcohol and cigarettes and all of those things. My deepest respect to them. And I want to thank you all again until next week, Thursday. I say goodbye for now. And of course, if you have any questions, you can call me and I'll try to respond to them. So thank you and Sitaram.